This is a 7.3 Power Stroke 99 model, and we are going to go into some injector diagnosis. When this engine was cold, it was extremely hard to start, and once it would finally start, it loped very bad, it misfired, and it would smoke really bad out of the tailpipe, black and white smoke. After it was allowed to warm up, the engine kept running. My injection control pressure was above 800 when I cranked, so I know it's not an oil pressure concern. I'm leaning more towards a failed fuel injector because of how the engine acts. So this is how we go about it on a 7.3 or a T444E if this engine was in an international truck. Just to verify that my high pressure oil system is healthy, I'm going to make sure that I get to proper pressure and my IPR works as I try to start it. So that's all good. Truck's shaking pretty good. We do have a misfire. So now it's time to go through some electrical and some mechanical diagnosis. So the first thing I'm going to do to verify that I have a misfire is I'm going to do what's called a cylinder contribution test. And what that is the computer will actually try to determine which cylinder is misfiring. The way that works on this particular engine is it will count the teeth on the camshaft gear as the engine runs. Every time a cylinder fires, the engine technically accelerates. So on the cylinder that is not firing or not contributing, will not accelerate on that tooth of the cam gear, and that will help determine which cylinder it is. So like I said, this is all mechanical. Or I'm sorry, electronic, my bad. So we're going to do a self-test and a cylinder contribution self-test. And all this is going to do is rev up the engine and count the teeth on the cam gear. The scan tool does it all for you. Cylinder 3. So we have determined that we have a dead misfire on cylinder 3. It is not contributing to the rest of the cylinders. The next thing we're going to look at is an electrical a buzz test on the injectors to make sure my electrical system is working properly. One quick note on buzz tests and contribution tests. You have to remember that these systems are fully electronic. So when you go through these tests, the computer is actually looking for feedback to find a problem. So if there was a problem in the buzz test, the computer would set a code for an issue. Let's say there was a short found in one of the injectors. The computer recognizes that, and it will come up with something. If it detects an open, it'll tell you which cylinder has an open. The same that happened with the contribution test. It tells me that cylinder number 3 is not contributing. So since we don't have a code that came up for our buzz test, that tells me that everything is working properly in the electrical system. So when you run a buzz test, the computer's doing a few things. One, it's making sure that the driver module is working correctly. It's sending power to the injectors, and then it's operating the injector itself. So it's sending voltage to the solenoid, and the buzz you're hearing is actually the valve, the ball and seat inside of the injector moving up and down. So if you did have an electrical problem, if this solenoid was shorted out, if there was a wiring issue between the IDM and the injector, you would have a trouble code set when you did that test. If you performed a buzz test and you did not hear a certain injector buzz and there was no codes associated with it, that tells you that the ball and seat inside the injector has failed. It's not making noise, which means it does not work. So since I didn't have any codes with my buzz test, but I do have a code for cylinder contribution, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to access cylinder number 3. Since I know I have a dead misfire, since I know I have oil pressure, since I know my electrical system works properly, and I obviously have good fuel pressure because all other 7 cylinders are working properly, that points me to that injector or that cylinder. So the next step is to access the injector and do a compression test to make sure you don't have a dead hole. That will mimic a failed injector, and if that tests out good, then I can condemn an injector and replace it. Now that I have my valve cover off, I'm ready to do my compression test. On all Huey engines, you want to do compression tests through the glow plug hole. You don't want to take an injector out and crank it because it can fill the cylinder full of oil and you can hydrolock a cylinder. So always go through the glow plug hole on Huey engines. The glow plug is below the injector on a 7.3. The reason that compression tests are so important when condemning an injector is you need 3 things to fire off. You need air, fuel, and compression. I know I have air. I'm questionable about the fuel, but if I don't have compression, you won't have a fire off on a cylinder, even with a perfectly good injector. So you want to make sure your compression is good. Low compression can be caused by anything such as a hole in a piston, a scored cylinder wall due to dusting, a broken valve, anything of the sort. So you want to make sure compression is good before you put a $400 injector down in there. So with my little bumper button, I'll go ahead and run a compression test. Just shy of 350 psi. That tells me my compression is good. I have a bad fuel injector. With my injector removed, I'm ready to go ahead and put in my new one. It's a pretty straightforward removal. All you have to do is remove the drain spout and the bottom hold down bolt, and you can pry the injector out. Make sure your bore is clean. Take a brush and a rag and clean everything out, any debris or oil. And then we're ready to go ahead and put our new injector in. So we've got our new injector in. Harness is back installed. I like to leave that glow plug out of the cylinder that I'm doing the injector in, and I'll crank it over a few times to kind of blow out any excess fuel or oil that might have gotten into the cylinder before I start it. So now it's time to get our valve cover back on, charge my batteries up, because I left the light on for 2 days, and prime the oil rails up and see if it starts and see if the injector fixed our problem. Okay, we're all together. Time to crank it up and build ICP pressure. Remember, it takes a long time for a Huey engine to start after you've drained the oil out of the injectors. IPR closes. You want to probably crank an engine at maximum of 15 seconds and give it about a 30-second break so you don't burn up the starter, and also run the batteries dead. PSI. There we go. warm it up, and then we're going to do another contribution test to see if our injector has fixed our problem. Okay, we're warmed up, so we're going to do another contribution test. And see if the computer sees anything. Still a lot of air in it, so I might have to let it run a little while longer too. Now we have a code for cylinder 8. So I'm going to go drive it and get any air that's left over out of it, because that could be a false reading because of the air. But my contribution code for cylinder number 3 is gone. So that's a good sign. As I'm driving it, it's getting noticeably better. Much better response. It doesn't lope, it doesn't miss anymore. My turn signal won't stop. That's interesting, I'm going to have to look into that, but it's running a lot better, so a good test drive does make a lot of difference on a Huey engine. Seriously, I have never seen that happen before. Just won't turn off. Ever since you fixed my injector, now my turn signal won't stop working, won't turn off. I can see it coming. Yep, it was just air. Runs very smooth now, except for that. That's kind of weird. But I think we've fixed our bad injector.